Collective Whisper podcast with Simon Kane. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Collective Whisper podcast. We have a fabulous guest for you on the show today. But before we get to that guest, we hope you're all keeping well. And we would like you, please share the show, please subscribe, please give us a review. We hope you're enjoying the content. And this guest is going to be very interesting, so let's get to it. My guest today is the remarkable Joe Berlinger, a true pioneer in the world of documentary filmmaking, whose career spans over 3 decades of groundbreaking storytelling. Was an Academy Award and 8-time Emmy-nominated filmmaker, as well as a recipient of the Peabody, DGA and Sundance Awards. His unique ability to blend gripping narratives with a powerful focus on social justice has made him one of the most influential voices in the documentary genre today. You probably know Joe from his iconic true crime films and series, including the Paradise Lost Trilogy, which not only captivated audiences but also played a crucial role in the release of the wrongfully convicted West Memphis 3. This trilogy set the gold standard for true crime documentaries, revealing the flaws in our justice system and inspiring justice reform. His film, Metallica, Some Kind of Monster, offered an unprecedented look into one of the world's biggest rock bands, breaking down stereotypes and redefining the rockumentary genre by exposing their personal struggles and creative challenges. Joe has also been a powerhouse on Netflix, where 16 of his projects have debuted in the platform's top 10, often at number 1. His works such as Conversations with the Killer, The Ted Bundy Tapes, and Madoff, The Monster of Wall Street has captivated millions worldwide, combining deep investigative journalism with masterful storytelling. His most recent series, Cold Case, Who Killed John Beñet Ramsey, delves into the infamous and unsolved 1996 murder of 6-year-old John Beñet Ramsey, shining a light on the mishandling of the case by both law enforcement and the media. But Joe's work is more than just entertainment. It's a catalyst for change. From advancing justice reform and aiding in the release of 6 wrongfully convicted individuals, to playing a pivotal role in the US acknowledgement of the Armenian genocide through his film Intent to Destroy, Joe's impact extends far beyond the screen. He's often called the gold standard of socially conscious true crime filmmaking, a description that speaks to his unyielding commitment to truth and justice. Today, we're going to explore Joe's extraordinary journey from his beginnings in storytelling and his creative process to the incredible behind-the-scenes stories of his iconic works. We'll discuss his passion for using documentaries as a vehicle for change, what drives his pursuit of truth in an ever-evolving media landscape, and his thoughts on the future of crime storytelling. It's not every day that you get to sit down with a true legend, so without further ado, Joe Berlinger, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be with you.
I was just telling Joe before the show there that I'm a big fan of his work, and I've been following it kind of over the years, on and off. It's good to see him back on the TV again and everything. You have a fascinating new show coming out next week on Netflix. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, on November 25th, we have airing Cold Case, Who Killed John Beñet Ramsey? It's a fascinating look at this iconic cold case. One of the reasons I did it is I think the case can finally be solved after 28 years if the Boulder police would only just do the DNA testing that the family has been asking for decades.
It's a very interesting case because we've seen it come up in different things over the years, and there's lots of different opinions about the child murders and child abductions, like the Madeleine McCann thing. So it's quite interesting after all this time for it to come back into the realm of modern kind of media, isn't it?
Definitely. And the main reason I wanted to do it is that there's such a misperception about this case. So many people still think the parents were guilty. At the time, shortly after the murders, the parents became suspects because one of the police officers at the scene got a weird feeling that John wasn't acting right. And that led the police department to have this tunnel vision that maybe the parents were, not maybe, that they were utterly convinced the parents were guilty. And they fed a lot of false and defamatory, in my opinion, defamatory stories to the press and leaked false information to the press. And that led all of America to believe that the parents had killed this little girl. And, Gallup did a poll back then, and 70% of America thought that the family was guilty. And the exact opposite is true. And that's hindered that false perception has hindered the investigation for years.
It sometimes goes that way, doesn't it? That the family is always the first people that everyone looks at. And on those cases, when they're looking for body language and are the family grieving, are they mourning, how are they react? Sometimes people form opinions really quickly, don't they?
Oh, yeah. In this case, they formed an opinion that morning that he wasn't acting properly. And, I always believe you have to follow the evidence because who knows how anyone is going to react in a horrible situation where the unthinkable has happened. It's the day after Christmas and your beautiful 6-year-old child was brutally sexually assaulted and murdered in the basement of your home by an intruder. How is anybody going to act in that case?
The other side of it as well is the whole beauty pageant thing, because some people wouldn't agree with this anyway. They'd be saying, well, when you come from that kind of world, maybe there's a lot of pressure put on children. And also, it seems like they're kind of making children into adults. And there's always talks of sexual abuse. So it really muddies the waters, doesn't it?
Yeah, when you hear it from the Ramseys' point of view about why they had their child participate in beauty pageants, it makes total sense. First of all, these pageants weren't big and massive. Secondly, it was coming from JonBenet. JonBenet wanted to participate in these beauty pageants. She was a very outgoing, mature for her years, young girl who enjoyed doing it. And her mother was getting over stage 4 ovarian cancer. And she had no idea whether she was going to live for the next 6 months, let alone 6 or 10 years. And so she wanted to have an activity with her daughter that her daughter wanted to do. To then make the conclusion, well, JonBenet participates in beauty pageants. The father has pictures in his office of her in beauty pageants, therefore he's sexually abusing his daughter and they murdered their daughter. It's just, how do you make that leap without any hard evidence? And there is no hard evidence against the family. I mean, if you look at the autopsy report, it's clear that this girl was tortured in a brutal way while she was still alive. And it just defies the whole idea. The theory is that, or the police theory was that over a bedwetting incident, Patsy Ramsey just lost control and accidentally killed her, and then they staged this crime scene to cover it up. But that just defies logic from so many aspects, including the autopsy report, which shows that she was, this poor young girl had a garrote around her neck that the perpetrator would choke her and then release and let her breathe, choke her and then let her breathe. And do we really think the mother, in a family that has no history of sexual abuse, the pediatrician said that JonBenet was not sexually abused. Do we really think that over a bedwetting incident, that somehow they fashioned a garrote around her neck, tortured her to death, strangled her slowly, because she had petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes and in the heart, which demonstrates slow strangulation? Do we really think that's a response to a bedwetting incident? It just defies logic.
I think in those cases as well, sometimes people say, oh, well, maybe there was a situation that got out of control. And I know there was also, I haven't watched the documentary yet, but when they talk about the other family members and everything, so there's always suspicion. But, when they look at the other kids and say they couldn't have done it. But in your case, when you investigated, you kind of go, well, the mother or father couldn't have done it either because they had no priors, they're not sociopath,
Yeah. The idea that the brother did it was dismissed even by the police, and yet if you go on Reddit today, you have many, many people continuing to promote the theory that the brother might have been guilty, which is just ludicrous and cruel.
We live in this world now of internet sleuth. So you could be investigating a case and maybe you talk to an FBI informer, you talk to a lawyer and you get firsthand evidence. But people nowadays on the net are just putting 1 and 1 together and getting 5. And unfortunately, they're very biased because sometimes they want one character to be innocent and one character to be guilty, don't they?
It's one of the dilemmas. It's one of the dilemmas of doing true crime. True crime is very popular. I make a lot of true crime. I try to do it with a social justice orientation. I always ask myself, what is the social justice angle here that's worthy of telling the story, whether it's trying to help somebody get out of prison who is innocent, or in this case, trying to force Boulder Police Department to finally do DNA testing, because I believe the case can be solved if they did that. So I always ask myself, what good can come out of me covering the case? But the problem with this genre is a lot of people just view it as entertainment, and they go down rabbit holes and they dissect case and they play armchair sleuths. And a lot of armchair sleuths have been helpful in cases, but also a lot of armchair sleuths have been hurtful. And whether we're making true crime or whether we're consuming true crime, you always have to remember that there's a real victim. It's not just an entertainment medium. It's not just a vehicle to consume a story. It's somebody's real tragedy. And when you're dissecting a real person's tragedy, you have a responsibility to not add to their pain, and to do it for good reasons and responsible reasons. So people who go down these Reddit rabbit holes accusing the brother, accusing the parents, I'm deeply troubled by that. And I have to ask myself, is this a genre that I'm contributing to this madness? Because I am one of the more popular purveyors of this kind of material, but I hate it when people don't look at the evidence and just go down these wild rabbit holes.
We'll come back to this story, but I just want to go back a little bit to how your career kind of began, and what was your interest in storytelling? Was it in that medium of television? Did you always want to go into that?
I wish I could tell you I was like Steven Spielberg, who I picked up a camera when I was 10 and started making Super 8 movies, and I knew I always wanted to be a filmmaker. I mean, it's ironic I'm a well-known, one of the more popular pioneering filmmakers in the genre, because I never intended that to be the case. My road to filmmaking is quite circuitous, to be honest. When I was a teenager, I was exposed to Holocaust liberation footage, all that horrible footage from, when they liberated the death camps, the corpses piled up and the barely living prisoners. And it just struck me so deeply. I mean, it disturbs anybody who sees it. If it doesn't disturb you, you should go see a psychiatrist, but that's another story. But, for the most part, anybody who sees that Holocaust footage is disturbed by it. But I was really disturbed. I couldn't get it out of my head. It kind of awoken in me this social justice bent that I haven't quite placed my finger on, that it makes me want to be a filmmaker yet. But it just awokened in me the desire to understand how people can do those kinds of things to one another. And so in college, to really deeply understand, I decided I wanted to be a German language major, because I really wanted to just say the Germans were evil and did this terrible thing is overly simplistic, because I don't think any one people is evil. And I think anti-Semitism was a European and global phenomenon. So I really wanted to understand how people could do this to one another. And so by the time I graduated from college, I was fluent in German. And I was no longer that obsessed with the Holocaust, but I was fluent in German and wanted to use that skill as a career. So I was looking for any career that would send me to Germany and use my language skills. And it just so happened I got hired by a big New York ad agency called Ogilvy and Mather to go work in their German office, because I spoke a few languages, especially German, and they needed a young American who spoke German. And so the first time I was ever on a film set was shooting an American Express commercial in Germany. So that was the first time I was on a set as kind of the young man, the junior man on the totem pole. And I looked around and I realized lights, camera, action, that's for me. The hell with this speaking German. I want to get into the film business. And so I came back to New York as a producer of TV commercials for this agency, this advertising agency, working in their New York office when we had a campaign idea to shoot documentary style commercials. And we hired the famous documentarians Albert and David Maysles, who did Salesman and Grey Gardens and Gimme Shelter. And I kind of hit it off with them. And so they hired me to go work for them more as their marketing person than as a filmmaker. But I used it as a film school learned everything I could about documentary. That's where I met Bruce Sinofsky, with whom I made the first 10 years of filmmaking I had with a partner named Bruce, who sadly passed away a decade ago. So, as you can see, it's very coincidental, a long, circuitous route to becoming a filmmaker. But once I became a documentarian, I realized everything happens for a reason, that it wasn't such chance, because I've had an incredible life. I look back and think about all the adventures I've had as a documentarian. Because you have a camera in hand, you get to enter into people's worlds, whether it's a Metallica at a time of crisis, or the JonBenet case that I just did, or Paradise Lost. You just get to experience the world in a whole other way, and it's been an incredible career.
I was mistaken when I said earlier the first time I saw your work was with the Metallica documentary, because I had seen the Paradise Lost, and I think I turned it on Channel 4 or some cable station and just started watching from like midway through, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. But I remember then after the Metallica documentary, I was thinking, okay, this guy's really good. I like the way he directs and the way he moves the whole scenes. And so I went back then and looked at Brothers Keeper and Paradise Lost Trilogy and so on. So it's funny like that, when you kind of accidentally can get into someone's work, and then sometimes through being a fan of something else, you can be pushed in their direction as well, can't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been greatly influenced by other people's work as well in that way, you know.
With the Paradise Lost, of course, that was a very dark subject, and the whole scene of the documentaries were kind of dark with the rock music. There was a message coming through there that just because you listen to this music, just because you're in this world, doesn't make you a sociopath or a killer. Even for you, making that was quite difficult, because it was a different style, wasn't it, using that dark imagery as well?
Yeah, a lot of people criticized Paradise Lost when it first came out because we used the aggressive Metallica tracks, but that was because Metallica lyrics were introduced into evidence at the murder trial that the kids were murderers, which is absurd. Since when does, your choice in music make you a murderer as evidence that you're a murderer? And it's also illogical, because Metallica music has nothing to do with devil worshipping. There is a branch of heavy metal that's more satanic oriented, but Metallica has nothing to do with devil worshipping or anything like that. So the whole idea was insane. But more importantly, anyone should read anything they want to and listen to any music they want to without fear of being called a murderer, which is just crazy. But also, the other reason that film was controversial is we used, as in the opening title sequence, or right before the opening title sequence, the kind of the pre-open of the film was the actual police crime scene footage where the bodies were discovered. And a lot of people felt like we were being a little too aggressive with that kind of imagery. But I thought it was very important to see how horrific the crime was, so that you had an understanding, so that people could understand how a town could have jumped to this conclusion without any evidence that these three kids were guilty. You had to understand that people were so scared and the police were so under pressure to solve the crime, because the crime was so horrific. You had to see the crime.
And then when you moved on to Metallica, Some Kind of Monster, which is an amazing documentary, it was very different from the other stuff, wasn't it? Because, of course, Paradise Lost, the fans who weren't Metallica fans were introduced to the music. But for you as well, then there was something there that kind of drew you towards working with them, wasn't there? And it wasn't true crime.
Well, the Metallica film, I have to say, one of the reasons it turned out to be so good is that it was all a happy accident. It was never intended to be the film that it came. So there was not a lot of thought that went into the starting of making it. Basically, we became friends with Metallica because they gave us not all their music, but all the music in the Paradise Lost film was Metallica, as we just talked about. And so a friendship developed. In particular, I became very friendly with Lars, the drummer, who loved Paradise Lost. And if Lars wasn't the founder of one of the biggest bands in the world, he would be a film producer, because he loves film. And so we started talking about doing something about the band, and it just was a bunch of conversation. And then at some point, they wanted us to shoot a little B-roll, because they were going back into the studio. And at the time, digital music was just starting to be a thing. but the business was still selling physical CDs. But Napster and other digital forms of music were starting to nip at the business. And so the record label wanted to have a little 20-minute little featurette to slap on the back of the CD as a bonus to help sell physical CDs, because that was the business back then. And so all we were really intending to do for that film was to come out and shoot a little B-roll of a very commercial project of them going into the studio so that we could create a little short film to be added to that CD of what would eventually become Saint Anger. But as I landed and I called Lars and said, "Hey, I'm here, let's start," he said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, Jason quit the band. I'm not sure there's a record. The band's falling apart. Sorry, man. Sorry you made the trip out here because there's not going to be any filming." And I said to myself, "Oh, gee, because Lars also said we're hiring a therapist to try to help us work through the issues." And so an immediate light bulb went off in my head. Man, that would be an interesting film, but they'll never let us do it. But somehow in the 24 hours that I was on the ground, I convinced them to let us film it. Let's see where it goes. And that ended up being this 3-year journey of filming Some Kind of Monster. I think if we had thought of it in advance as some premeditated idea that we were going to make a film about them going into therapy, I don't think the film ever would have happened. But just, I saw an opportunity, I pushed my way in, and it became this incredible film. So I think that one of the reasons the film works so well, it was just a happy accident.
Because it has that feel as well when you watch it, that even though you know the film is finished, it has that feel all the time. Even will the documentary even get finished? Because James is dealing with his own issues, Lars is kind of pushing things, but they're biting at each other. And for you, it must have been very difficult to be around that and not feel in the way, no?
Yeah, it's amazing that they let the cameras roll, to be honest with you. I mean, and then it's amazing that they let the film play, that they let it be released, because heavy metal music, I mean, the music business in general is very image conscious, and heavy metal music is this image of toughness and male testosterone. And here we were taking these idols off of their pedestals and showing them as human beings. I think it was incredibly brave that they let the film go and play. In fact, at one point, we agreed to show them a cut because after 3 years they hadn't seen anything, and we were about to finish the film and send it off to Sundance. And technically speaking, we had final cut on the film, but they controlled the music rights. So if they didn't like the film, they could have withheld the music rights, and therefore the film would have been killed. So we had a screening at their headquarters. Actually, it was not their headquarters. It was Skywalker Ranch, because Lars is friends with George Lucas. But we're in this private screening room in California at Skywalker Ranch, and the movie plays, and there's not a word spoken. I mean, just total silence, and we're like thinking, "Oh my God, they hate the film." And we went into a room, and they start dissecting. Well, we can't show our fans that we paid Rob Trujillo $1 million. We can't show Lars is auctioning off his Basquiat at Christie's for millions of dollars. We can't show this, can't show that. And every scene in the film was like they were nervous, and it was getting dissected. And although Lars was actually pretty quiet, he was the least concerned about it. It was sometimes the managers, sometimes other members of Metallica, people with vested interests, were kind of freaking out about the film. And I'm seeing this because at this point I know we have something special that can inspire people, and that would be a really positive film. And I'm seeing this dream start to crumble before my eyes. And then at one point I kind of looked over towards James, just as the right moment, when he had this moment of calm come over him, because Bruce and I were defending all of our decisions. Well, you can show that scene for this reason, that reason. So we were doing a very good job of defending the film. And all of a sudden I saw this look come over James Hetfield's face, and he kind of stood up and he said, "Look, these guys promised to tell us the truth, and they did. This is a truthful film. It hurts to watch. I don't think I'll ever watch it again. But we either lock this film away and never show it, like Cocksucker Blues, the famous Rolling Stones documentary that was banned for a long time. I think it still may be banned. I don't remember the status. But we either lock this film away and never show it, like Cocksucker Blues, or we let these guys make whatever film they want to make because it's the truth. So I don't want anything changed. This is after 2 hours of everyone saying, you got to cut this scene, we can't show our fans this. And then all of a sudden, James had this moment of clarity and said, you know what? I'm not going to watch it again. You guys told the truth. Good luck with the film. And then Lars gets up and he pats me on the shoulder and he says, congratulations, you got your film. And they walked out, and that was that. And they didn't ask for a single frame to be changed. And I think that is incredibly courageous. And that decision stood the test of time. I mean, many people consider this one of the greater rock and roll films ever made. I can't tell you how many people in music have come up to me over the years, other band, like well-known people, like I don't want to name drop, but like some serious other world-famous musicians who have come up to me and said, thank you for making that film because it gave our band the permission to talk about some of these issues. It gave our band a vehicle for working out our issues, for understanding it's okay to have problems, to understand that you can't keep drinking and taking drugs and continue to have a band that stands the test of time. I know this film has made a real mark, and I think it's because it's just this incredibly authentic, honest, accidental experience that was never meant to actually be.
I think even with yourself coming out with the book afterwards, This Monster Lives, it was nearly like your own form of therapy after dealing with the whole thing for 3 years, wasn't it? Because you were all involved. It was like a team effort to make the movie, but it takes its toll on everybody. And it's hard to watch for them, I suppose. But even for you being there, and being a team with Bruce as well.
Yeah, I mean, really what happened was Bruce and I we were very young. I was 28. He was 5 years older than me. I was 28 when we made Brother's Keeper. It was immediately successful. Your first film goes to Sundance, wins a prize, gets all this positive attention. Our second film was Paradise Lost, huge success on HBO. So right out of the gate, we were very successful, and that kind of plays with your head a little bit. And so we were in this weird situation of being a filmmaking team, and we had this great success, so your egos start to get in the way, and we both were just having a hard time like being a team and wanting to do our own thing. So we had kind of broken up before Metallica, before that film was made. And in fact, I'm the guy who went out to San Francisco and started making Metallica by myself as when we thought it was just a little 20-minute promo. And because Bruce and I had broken up as a partnership in a not a pleasant way, it wasn't handled well, mainly by me. I will have to admit, I'm the one with the bigger ego who decided I wanted to be more on my own than to be with a filmmaking partner. But when I saw the direction that the Metallica film was going, that we were actually filming therapy sessions and that these guys were dealing with the same issues that Bruce and I were dealing with, this kind of creative and existential crisis that broke up our relationship, and the battle of egos that like Lars and James were having, it just struck me like a thunderbolt, that Bruce should be involved in the making of the film, and we should heal our breakup, because first and foremost, he was my best friend and we had amazing adventures together, and I felt like I didn't handle the breakup properly. So I asked Bruce to be a part of the film, and we ended up making this great film together, and we spent, that entire time when therapy sessions, we were filming these incredible therapy sessions between these major rock stars. We'd go home at night, back to our hotel, and have our own therapy to talk. We'd talk through our own issues and try to come up with a way that we could work together. Essentially, I was reacting to being joined at the hip with somebody. Like after Brother's Keeper, and especially after Paradise Lost, nobody wanted to hire just one of us to make a film. It was always, we got to hire the two of you because we don't know which of you is actually the guy who did the magic. And that just didn't feel good to me. I wanted to have my own career, and I wanted Bruce to have his own career. And so using the Metallica therapy sessions, we realized, none of this I could have told you prior to Metallica. My ego got a little out of control, and I broke up the relationship. And, I realized I didn't handle it right, brought Bruce back into the fold, and then we worked out how to function together so that sometimes we can make films together and sometimes we can make films separately. So it was, the therapy sessions were good for me as well.
You have over 16 Netflix projects. So what do you think has made your work resonate so strongly with the Netflix audience?
I don't know, man. In the old days, like Brothers Keeper, which we actually had to self-distribute, it won a prize at Sundance, and still nobody wanted to distribute it, so we decided to self-distribute it ourselves. We literally did a theatrical release ourselves where we paid for everything and did all the work to get the movie out there. And if 400 people saw the film in a weekend, Bruce and I would high five each other like we died and went to heaven, like, oh my God, 400 people saw our film this weekend. Now I squeeze something out on Netflix and literally 100 million people see it. It's just mind boggling to me. So, I think documentaries in general have become very popular, obviously. I'd like to think I've had a hand in that along with my colleagues. There are a lot of people who have made great documentaries that have helped further the genre. I'd like to, obviously, true crime has never been more popular, and that's an area I've been doing for 30 years before the phrase true crime even was a thing. There's just something about the combination of my work on Netflix has produced huge number of people who see the stuff around. I don't understand it, to be honest with you.
There is some controversy with Netflix documentaries because we've seen in the media recently where people have been talking about they change the narrative to be more entertaining in some shows, not your shows, but in other shows. I won't name any names, but there's been some documentaries where they've had, let's say, a show that's been edited, and then when they show the edits in another show, it paints a different picture. So how do you get around that from your part, like where Netflix executives will say, oh, could you change this? Do you have total control?
I have done enough work for them and have enough stature in the business that I can't say that I have final cut, but if I really object to a note, they will give me notes, and a lot of their notes are helpful. They have good executives there, but there are certain lines I won't cross. And I've never experienced what you're talking about where they change something that changes the reality of the situation. Sometimes we disagree on how to structure a show or which scene should come first or whether a scene belongs in the show or not, because they're very much concerned about, one of the metrics Netflix likes to use is not just how many people watch the show, but how many people complete the show. Like the binging, binging is the holy grail for them. Like,
right.
To watch the entire series in one sitting. Then the next holy grail is how many people actually completed the show, because some people start shows but don't finish. So we may disagree on how long an episode should be, the order of the scenes. Sometimes I like stuff in there for intellectual reasons that they feel like slows the pacing down. So there'll be those kinds of conversations, but I've never been in a situation where they'll ask me to change the meaning of something. So that I have not experienced and couldn't talk to.
Okay, it's good to hear that, actually, because you can see how some documentaries can get steered in a different direction and the narrative totally changes. And maybe if it's a young and upcoming director, they don't have so much control and we hear a different story, and maybe that's not what they intended.
Yeah, no, I mean, I never have those kinds of battles to be. I think they've been good to work with. It's been a great combination. I've done 16 shows for them in about 4 or 5 years. Most of them have been in the top 10, if not the number one doc that week, and I reach a lot of people. As somebody who started in this business where documentaries were not profitable, literally 30 years ago, if you didn't sell your documentary, in the United States at least, if you weren't getting funding from HBO or PBS, you weren't making a documentary. There wasn't all these networks and streamers and outlets for documentaries. The whole idea of a docu-series, that didn't exist when I was first coming into making films. I mean, literally, the only games in town were HBO and PBS. And the first almost 10 years of my career, the way I really made money was as a TV commercial director, because documentaries were not very lucrative. Making Brothers Keeper and Paradise Lost enhanced my reputation so that in the TV commercial business, I was considered a cool filmmaker who, in addition to commercials, I'm a cool filmmaker. So that helped me get more TV commercial directing jobs. But the documentaries themselves were not big money makers, So now it's a real business. Now there's many outlets, many ways to get your documentaries made. It's a whole different environment.
Are there any untold stories or social issues that I'd like to tackle without giving too away?
Yeah, one of the great things about having a career that you're passionate about and that is creative is I'll never retire. I mean, what is retirement? Making films is a lifestyle that I certainly don't ever want to leave. So I have many, many ideas that I am thinking about and wanting to do. It's been an endless university for me, just entering into people's lives at the right moment, and you get to witness things that most people don't get to witness because you have a camera in your hand. It's a wonderful existence.
On the John Beñet Ramsey thing, how long ago did you wrap filming on that? Do we see it like nowadays? Does it move much faster that you wrap filming and it's released within a few months, or how long ago did you finish?
We handed that show in about 8 months ago.
So by the time that show comes out or others like it, you're maybe into other projects at that stage too.
Oh yeah, I've already shot 2 things since we handed JonBenet in. 2 more Netflix shows.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a fascinating story, and I'm sure people are going to have opinions on it and on the characters in it. As in all your documentaries, it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Cool. I hope so. Yeah, I hope people tune in. November 25th is the release date.
Very good. Joe Berlinger, it's been fabulous to talk to you, and it's been really interesting to go back a little bit over your career and everything. And we want to say well done, and we commend you for all your work.
You did a great job asking questions.
Thank you very much. Joe Berlinger, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Joe Berlinger. That was a fascinating interview. As a big fan of your work over the years, it's been a pleasure to interview today and to find out some behind-the-scenes things that we never knew about. And there's so many cases, Whitey Bulger, the John Benet Ramsey, the Metallica documentary, all amazing. I've always been enthralled by all of this and your work in general. So thank you very much for coming on the show, and thank you for giving us your time. And we know the listeners will enjoy this interview. So, to you, the guests at home as well, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I am Simon Kay. This is the Collective Whisper podcast. And until the next time, take care of yourself, your friends, and your family. Bye-bye.